Welcome to the Walking Dread podcast, where we explore the dark side of storytelling.
I'm Julia, your guide through the shadows.
I'm your host, Adrian, and each day we'll be sharing an addictive horror story.
Nightmares.
Terrifying tales and ancient curses, all designed to shake you to your core.
But don't worry.
We'll keep it fun and spooky with masterful storytelling. So make sure to rate and follow for more chilling episodes of the Walking Dread podcast.
Today we're diving into a classic urban legend that's been giving people chills for generations.
Midnight Mary.
You know the one, right?
Oh yeah, the vengeful spirit lurking in the local cemetery just waiting for some foolish soul to call her name.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this classic setup.
Teenagers adare a cemetery at night.
It's Horror 101, right?
Yeah.
But why does this story still creep us out? What makes it stick with you?
It's the way it plays on our fascination with forbidden knowledge. I think these teens aren't just messing around, they're actively trying to summon something from beyond. There's an arrogance to it, a belief they can control the supernatural, and that hubris, well, it's usually punished in these stories.
Yeah, it's like they're playing with fire. They think it's all fun and games until something actually answers back. And that chanting, Midnight Mary, Midnight Mary, Midnight Mary, it's not just for show. It builds this hypnotic rhythm almost like a trance.
Exactly. The repetition creates this sense of inevitability, like something is being unleashed whether they're ready for it or not. And then there she is.
Midnight Mary.
The story doesn't give us a detailed description, does it?
No, not really.
She's this shadowy figure, almost formless. Makes you wonder what's scarier, what you can see or what you can't.
Oh, definitely what you can't.
Yeah.
Our imaginations fill in those gaps, and often what we come up with is way more terrifying than anything a writer could describe.
Yeah.
But she does have one striking feature.
Yes, those glowing red eyes.
It's a visual shorthand for danger, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It immediately triggers a fear response. Even before we consciously understand why red eyes piercing the darkness, it just screams threat.
You know, you're not supposed to look, but you can't help yourself.
Right, like a deer in headlights. It's primal. Think about it, predators hunting at night, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. It's an image that's been hardwired into our brains for millennia as a sign of danger.
And what do the teens do when faced with this terrifying apparition?
What do? They split up. Classic horror movie blunder.
Talk about playing right into her hands.
It's almost as if they're asking to be picked off one by one, and of course that's exactly what seems to happen. The next morning, Jake, one of the teens, is nowhere to be found.
Gone without a trace.
And that's where the story takes a truly dark turn. It's not just spooky anymore, there are real consequences. It makes you question everything. Did they actually summon something? Was it all just a horrible coincidence?
And that uncertainty, that's what lingers long after the story is over.
What happened to Jake? Is he out there somewhere lost and alone? Or did Midnight Mary claim him as her own?
We don't know. The story doesn't tell us. And that's part of what makes it so unsettling. It leaves us with more questions than answers and lets our imagination fill in the rest.
Speaking of which, the story doesn't even explicitly say that Midnight Mary is responsible for Jake's disappearance, does it? It could be something else entirely, something lurking in the shadows of that cemetery.
Exactly. Maybe it's a wild animal or even a human predator taking advantage of the situation. But by leaving it open to interpretation, the story taps into a much deeper fear, the fear of the unknown. The idea that there are things out there we can't explain, things that might be watching us right now.
It makes you wonder, are we truly alone in the darkness? Or is there something else out there, something ancient and powerful, just waiting for us to make a mistake?
That's a chilling thought, isn't it? And it's a thought that stays with you long after you finish listening to the story.
Yeah, that's the power of a good horror story. Gets under your skin and makes you question the very nature of reality. And trust me, listener, this story's not over yet. Midnight Mary's got a few more tricks up her sleeve. We're going to delve deeper into this urban legend, explore its origins, and analyze what makes it so effective at scaring the living daylights out of us. And who knows, maybe we'll even learn a thing or two about what to do if we ever find ourselves face to face with Midnight Mary.
Don't tempt fate.
Maybe you're right. But for now, let's get back to the story.
The remaining teens are terrified, obviously. They try to go back to their normal lives, pretend like nothing happened. But that feeling of dread, that sense of being watched, it just won't go away. It's like a shadow that follows them everywhere.
It makes you wonder, is it just paranoia, the aftermath of a traumatic experience? Or is Midnight Mary really toying with them, savoring their fear?
That's the brilliance of psychological horror.
Right.
It preys on our doubts, our anxieties. It makes us question our own sanity, because if you can't trust your own mind, what can you trust?
And that leads us to one of the most fascinating characters in this story. Remember her? She's the one who's feeling incredibly guilty about what happened. She can't shake the feeling that it was her fault that she's responsible for Jake's disappearance.
It's a classic horror trope, isn't it? The weight of guilt, the desperate need for redemption. Sarah believes that if she can just apologize to Midnight Mary, maybe everything will go back to normal. Maybe she can even bring Jake back.
But think about what that implies.
What's that?
It means accepting responsibility for summoning a vengeful spirit. It means acknowledging that the supernatural is real, that the world is a much more dangerous place than she ever imagined.
It's a terrifying realization, and it's a realization that many horror protagonists face. They've stumbled into a realm beyond their understanding, and there's no going back. The rules have changed, and the stakes are suddenly much higher.
And those stakes are about to get even higher for Sarah because she makes a fateful decision. She decides to go back to the cemetery.
Alone? At night?
You guessed it. She feels compelled to face her fears, to confront Midnight Mary and beg for forgiveness. It's a brave act, but also a foolish one, because as we know, some doors are best left closed.
The cemetery at night, it's a liminal space. A place where the veil between the worlds is thin. It's a place where the dead can walk and the living can easily lose their way.
And it's a place where Sarah's about to come face to face with something truly terrifying. Something that will change her life forever.
Or end it. We'll find out what happens next after a quick break.
Don't go anywhere, listener. We'll be right back with the chilling conclusion of Midnight Mary.
The image of Sarah alone in that cemetery calling out to this vengeful spirit. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yeah.
You know, it's not going to end well.
Right. You're practically screaming at her through the story. Don't do it, Sarah. Turn back. Anything but that. But of course, in horror, characters rarely make the smart choice.
That's what keeps us on the edge of our seats, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That tension between knowing what the character should do and watching them do the exact opposite.
Absolutely. And in this case, Sarah's decision taps into another primal fear.
Oh.
The fear of the consequences of our actions. We've all done things we regret, maybe even things we feel guilty about.
Yeah.
And this story takes that feeling and amplifies it, shows us the darkest possible outcome.
And it does it through atmosphere. Think about the setting again, the cemetery at night. It's not just a place of death. It's a place of shadows and secrets, a place where our deepest fears can take shape.
Yeah, it's like the cemetery itself becomes a character in the story. It's oppressive, suffocating, almost like it's closing in on Sarah as she walks deeper and deeper into its heart.
And there they are again.
Those glowing red eyes.
But this time they're different. They're not just watching, they're hunting. It's like Midnight Mary has been waiting for Sarah, anticipating her return.
You can almost feel the shift in power, can't you? Before it was the teens who were in control trying to summon Midnight Mary. Now the tables have turned. Midnight Mary is in control and Sarah is the one being summoned.
And what does Sarah do? Does she run? Does she fight back?
No. She does the only thing she can think of. She apologizes.
Yeah.
She begs for forgiveness.
Yeah.
She pleads for Jake's return.
But Midnight Mary isn't interested in apologies or pleas. She's a force of nature, a vengeful spirit who demands retribution. And she's about to unleash her fury on Sarah.
The story doesn't go into detail about what happens next.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't need to.
Yeah.
We can fill in the blanks ourselves.
Yeah.
The glowing red eyes, the shadowy figure, the suffocating darkness of the cemetery. It all builds to a climax that is both terrifying and inevitable.
And then silence. The next morning, Sarah is gone. Just like Jake, she's vanished without a trace. The story ends with the remaining teens living in fear, haunted by the memory of what they've seen and done.
They're left to wonder, will they be next? Will Midnight Mary come for them too?
Oh.
Or are they already trapped in her web, doomed to live out their days in fear and paranoia?
It's a bleak ending, isn't it? But it's also a powerful one. Because it leaves us with a lingering sense of unease, a feeling that the story isn't truly over. It makes us question the boundaries between the living and the dead, and the consequences of tampering with forces we don't understand.
So what do you think, listener? Are you feeling brave enough to walk through a cemetery at night? Or will you heed the warnings of this chilling tale and stay far away?
I know, I'll be sleeping with the lights on tonight.
Me too. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in our own minds. The ones that linger in the shadows, just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
Sweet dreams.
Thanks for joining us for another spine-tingling tale on the Walking Dread podcast. Rate and follow for more scary stories if you dare. You know, it's interesting how this story, even though it's short and simple, managed to tap into so many of our deepest fears.
Right, it's like a greatest hits of horror tropes.
Mm.
The vengeful spirit, the forbidden ritual, the isolated setting, the psychological torment. But it's the way these elements are woven together that makes the story so effective.
Exactly. It's not just about jump scares or gore. It's about that slow burn of dread, that feeling of unease that builds and builds until you're practically holding your breath waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And it's that sense of anticipation that really gets under your skin, isn't it?
Yeah,
The story doesn't give us all the answers. It leaves us hanging, wondering what's going to happen next, what's lurking around the corner. And that's what makes it so replayable, so retellable. We can fill in the gaps with our own imaginations, making the story even more personal, even more terrifying.
absolutely. Like, we never actually see Midnight Mary, right?
Right.
We only get glimpses, those glowing red eyes, the shadowy figure. But that's enough. Our brains do the rest, conjuring up an image that's probably far more frightening than anything the story could explicitly describe.
It's like the story is a blueprint, and our fear is the building material. We're building our own haunted houses in our minds, and that makes the experience so much more immersive, so much more visceral.
And that's why this story and others like it continue to resonate with us generation after generation.
Yeah.
They tap into something primal, something deep within our collective unconscious. The fear of the unknown, the fear of death, the fear of the consequences of our actions. These fears are as old as humanity itself, and they're not going anywhere.
And the best horror stories, the ones that truly stay with us, they don't just exploit those fears, they explore them. They make us confront them, make us question them, and ultimately make us understand them better.
Exactly. And in doing so, they remind us that even in the darkest of times, even when faced with the most terrifying of monsters, we're not alone. We have each other, and we have the power of storytelling to help us make sense of the world around us, even the parts that scare us the most.
So the next time you find yourself walking through a cemetery at night, remember the story of Midnight Mary. And remember, the most important thing is not to let fear control you. Face it, understand it, and use it to make yourself stronger.
Thanks for joining us for another chilling tale on the Walking Dread podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with another addictive horror story, another terrifying tale, another journey into the dark side of storytelling.
Until then, sweet dreams.
And don't forget to keep the lights on.